If you've ever had an ordinary Saturday turn strange in a way your body understood before your mind did, stay with me for a minute. Because what happened to me started with 4 words in a shopping centre and ended with my whole marriage coming apart in fluorescent light. And before I go any further, subscribe now if you like stories that get under your skin a bit, because this one still sits with me even now. My name's Claire, I'm from Melbourne, and the day my husband said, just a few minutes, I honestly thought he meant exactly that. We were at Chadstone on a wet Saturday in August, the kind of grey Melbourne afternoon where everyone ends up indoors spending money they probably shouldn't. Daniel wanted to duck in quickly before we drove to his parents' place in Glen Waverley for dinner. He said he had to collect something he'd ordered. Nothing dramatic, nothing memorable. I was holding 2 takeaway coffees and standing near the escalators watching people drag shopping bags through the centre like little portable versions of their own lives. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I texted him and he replied with, "Nearly done. Just a few more minutes." You know when something isn't wrong enough to justify a fight, but it still pricks at you? That was Daniel's specialty. Small delays. Half explanations, tiny things that made me feel unreasonable for even noticing them. Would that have bothered you, or would you have done what I did and talked yourself into being easygoing? A girl from one of the stores approached me then. Early 20s, neat ponytail, black polo with a name badge. She looked nervous in that very specific way people do when they've already decided to say something difficult. She glanced over her shoulder and lowered her voice. "Mum, please come with me." At first I thought something had happened to Daniel. That was honestly my first thought. A fall, a medical episode, something awful and random. She led me into a baby furniture store I hadn't even noticed. Past display cots and prams with little price tags hanging off them, past a wall of soft animal print blankets and those expensive rocking chairs people buy before they understand how little sitting down there'll actually be. Then she took me into the back office and shut the door. She asked, "Are you Claire Weston?" I said yes. She swallowed and slid a folder across the desk. On the top page was my full name, my address, my date of birth, and a finance application with my signature on it. Only it wasn't my signature, not really. It was Daniel's careful imitation of it. I remember staring at that page and having the oddest thought. Not anger, not even disbelief. Just this cold, simple thing. He practiced that. The sales assistant said she was sorry, genuinely sorry. She told me Daniel had been in a few times over the past month with a woman who was heavily pregnant. Today he'd come in to finalise the nursery package and arrange delivery. The order included a cot, dresser capsule, stroller, change table, mattress, and one of those reclining nursery chairs worth more than my first car. All of it had been put through using my details as co-applicant, and the delivery address wasn't ours. It was a townhouse in Point Cook. For a second, I genuinely thought there had to be some explanation so bizarre it would eventually circle back to harmless. Maybe a family member, maybe a mix-up, maybe someone borrowing details. The mind will do humiliating things to keep your life intact for just another 30 seconds. Then the girl said one more thing. She's out there with him now. I don't think she knows. That was the moment my stomach dropped, because I knew exactly what that meant. Daniel and I had been married for 6 years. We met when I was 28 at a friend's grand final barbecue in Richmond. He wasn't flashy. That was part of his appeal. He was the kind of man who stacked plates after dinner without being asked and remembered which train line your office was on. After a few years of men who mistook charm for character, Daniel looked solid. Steady can be a very convincing disguise. 3 years into our marriage, I got pregnant and lost it at 11 weeks. I don't talk about that often because some grief feels rude to drag into daylight, but it matters here. After that, I wanted to try again. Daniel said we should wait until things were less stressful. Then interest rates went up and he said we had to be smart. Then work got busy and he said maybe next year. Every version of the future he offered me involved patience. Meanwhile, apparently, he was building one somewhere else. I asked the assistant if I could see the rest of the paperwork. The order had been paid in instalments from a joint credit card Daniel managed. There were emails confirming the delivery window. There were notes about colour choices, natural oak, sage green, and at the bottom of one page in that cold little admin font was a comment from Daniel himself. Partner due late September. Need everything set up by mid-month, partner not wife. Not mistress, not mistake, partner. If you were standing where I was in that little stockroom, looking at a fake version of your own signature under a nursery order for another woman's baby, what would you do first? Walk straight out and blow the whole thing open, or go very, very quiet? I went quiet. I asked the girl to print everything she legally could and email the rest to the address listed on the application, which was mine. I told her not to process a single thing. She nodded like she'd been hoping I'd say that. Then, because life has a cruel sense of timing, I heard Daniel laugh through the office wall. I knew that laugh. I'd lived beside it for 6 years. Heard it in bed, in traffic, over dinner, on holidays down the Mornington Peninsula. And hearing it in a baby store while he furnished another woman's life with my name attached to the debt did something very final to me. I looked through the narrow gap in the office blinds. He was standing beside a woman in a cream knit dress, one hand resting lightly on her back like it had every right to be there. She was pregnant enough that there was no confusion, no maybe, no misunderstanding. He was pointing at prams like a man comparing lawnmowers at Bunnings, calm, practical, comfortable like betrayal was just another errand. The woman looked younger than me, not wildly, maybe early 30s, dark hair tied up, tired face, one hand under her belly, the way women do when the weight of it starts talking back. She didn't look smug, she looked trusting. That complicated things, because rage is easier when the other woman looks like a villain. I slipped out through the staff exit into the car park and sat in my car with the windows fogging up around me. I didn't cry straight away. I just held the steering wheel and tried to breathe properly. Imagine you were sitting in that car with me. Would you have called him on the spot and demanded the truth? Or would you have waited long enough to find out how many lies were holding hands underneath the first one? I waited. That night, Daniel came home after dropping me a message about traffic near the Monash, and sorry, that took longer than expected. He kissed my cheek in the kitchen and asked if I'd eaten. I looked at him and realised something I wish I'd understood years earlier. Some people don't lie by accident. They build systems around it. They learn your good qualities and use them like tools. Your patience, your empathy, your instinct to keep the peace. They make those things work for them. I said nothing. The next morning, while he was in the shower, I opened the laptop he never bothered hiding because he thought secrecy lived in passwords, not patterns. I found a folder in his email archive called PC Lease Point Cook. Inside it was everything I needed: a lease agreement in his name, utility bills, pharmacy receipts, prenatal appointment reminders forwarded from a woman named Michaela, messages between them going back almost 2 years. Not romantic, not really, mostly logistics. Doctor times, grocery lists, complaints about back pain. He'd told her he was separated and sorting out the house. He told me he was working late in Richmond every Thursday. Turns out he was driving out west to play house in a rental I didn't know existed. And then I found the message that settled the last question in me. Michaela: "Are you sure she won't see the finance stuff?" Daniel: "Claire never checks that account. She trusts me. There are sentences that don't just hurt you. They reorganize you. Claire never checks that account. She trusts me." By lunchtime, I'd spoken to a lawyer in the CBD named Narelle, a woman with silver hair and the kind of voice that doesn't waste oxygen. I forwarded everything: the forged finance, the lease, the messages, the joint funds. She read it all and said, "Do not confront before we secure the money." That sentence saved me from doing something emotional and useless. So I became methodical. I opened a new bank account and redirected my salary. I pulled copies of every mortgage document, every credit card statement, every redraw history. I found payments to obstetricians, a private hospital in Parkville, furniture deposits, rent, utilities. My money had helped fund the version of his future he intended to reveal to me only when it was too established to stop. For 3 days, I smiled when necessary and answered in full sentences. That might not sound brave, but if you've ever shared a bed with someone after discovering they've turned your trust into cover, you'll know composure can feel like combat. Then I emailed Michaela, not out of spite, out of fairness. I attached our marriage certificate, a copy of the mortgage showing Daniel still living with me, and the finance application forged in my name. I wrote one line: "I thought you deserved the truth before your child arrives." She replied an hour later. She didn't know. Of course she didn't. Daniel had told her we were separated, that I was dragging things out, that the legal side was messy. Same man, different script. Sometimes I still think about that. How many women get handed the same liar in slightly different packaging and are expected to fight each other instead of him? The actual revenge happened on a Tuesday and it was very quiet. Daniel thought we were meeting our broker in Camberwell to discuss refinancing. He'd been pushing that for weeks, saying we could consolidate debt and get ahead before the baby conversation starts again, which feels almost funny now in the darkest possible way. At 10 a.m, he walked into that office expecting my signature. Instead, he was handed notice that our joint accounts had been flagged, the refinance would not proceed, and my solicitor had filed for separation with allegations of financial misconduct and identity fraud attached. At 10:12, the baby store's finance provider contacted him about the forged application. At 10:20, Michaela sent him a message saying she knew everything and the townhouse key would be left with the agent. At 10:37, he called me 16 times. I answered once. He started with, "Claire, let me explain." That line always interests me. Explain what? The affair? The forged signature? The second home? The pregnancy? The fact that he planned to tie me to more debt while setting up a nursery for another woman? He kept talking anyway, said it got complicated, said he'd meant to tell me, said Michaela was vulnerable when they met, said he panicked, said he didn't know how to fix it without destroying everything, and there it was, the only honest sentence hidden inside all the others. He didn't know how to keep both lives, so I said, "You should have thought about that before you used mine to pay for yours." Then I hung up. The separation took 7 months. Not fast. Not clean, but facts are stubborn things when they're written down properly. The forged finance application mattered. So did the lease, so did the money trail, so did the messages proving he was planning around my ignorance, not confessing into it. In the end, I kept my share of the house. The accounts were untangled. The fraud complaint stayed on record. And Daniel learned something men like him rarely expect to learn. A calm woman with documents is far more dangerous than a devastated one with tears. I moved into a smaller place in Yarraville after everything was final. It has creaky floorboards, morning light in the kitchen, and exactly one chair at the table that nobody has ever lied from. It's not the life I thought I was building, but it is honest, and honesty turns out to be far more peaceful than company. The part people always ask about is whether I hate him. I don't, actually. Hate is noisy and I was tired. What I feel is clearer than that. I learned that love without truth isn't love at all. It's administration. It's performance. It's someone managing your reactions so they can keep benefiting from your belief in them. And the lesson, if there has to be one, is this. When a person keeps asking you to be patient while the facts stay blurry, don't confuse that with loyalty. Sometimes be understanding is just a nicer way of saying don't look too closely. So let me leave you with this. After someone has used your trust as camouflage, do you think trust ever comes back whole, or does it always return carrying the shape of the wound?